I admit that I made a mistake. I admit that I was wrong. If you watch this show from the beginning, if you go back and read my book, Days of the Trap, I assumed that marijuana legalization would put drug dealers out of business. It would put the weed man out of business. It would cripple the cartels, especially in this country. It would make it so hustlers like me would just become irrelevant. I was sure of it. I was sure that I was the last generation to take advantage of the illegal marijuana gold rush, right? In many ways, I was right about that. But dude, I have never been more wrong about the effects that it had on crime. Now, the Chinese gangs that immigrate to this country, generally, they get their hands into a few things, right? It's either fentanyl because they bring it over, the chemicals over from China, and they deal a lot with the cartels, right? So Chinese precursor chemicals, they have agents that will make deals with Sinaloa and Nuevo Jalisco down there in Mexico to supply them with the precursors for meth and fentanyl. In the United States, though, these guys specialize in indoor weed growing operations and at a massive scale. In my day, back in Portland in the mid-2000s, it was the Vietnamese. There's a big Vietnamese community in Portland, and they were known to have the weight. They were known to have the bricks. But the Chinese now have that shit sewed up, and they're Asian, so they're fastidious with it. They're organized. So today we're going to talk about probably the biggest Chinese weed cartel out of the state of Colorado in the history of Colorado. So this story goes back to 2009 in Denver, Colorado. The DEA performed what they dubbed Operation Fortune Cookie, which is hilariously racist. This was the name of the task force that was trying to take down this Chinese weed syndicate that was literally flooding Colorado, making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So this is all began, and the leaders of this organization were a couple of brothers. One of them owned a restaurant in Denver that was famous all over the world. George W. Bush would come there and personally request to go eat at this restaurant. They knew politicians. They knew business people in the community. This was kind of like a cornerstone of this Denver suburb, okay? This is important to the story. This is one of the brothers, okay? The other brother was the mastermind behind the weed operation. This brother had gone to Canada before moving to Denver, and according to authorities, had perfected his indoor growing ability there in Canada, then moved to Colorado and ended up bringing over all of his other relatives from China and from Canada and opening up shop and starting the weed cartel. So you have these two brothers. One of them grows the weed and controls the operation, oversees the management of the weed business, and the other brother who owns the restaurant laundered the money through the restaurant. Okay, so these guys were buying suburban Colorado homes. They were paying like $350 to $500 per home, and they were getting really cheap mortgages in which to do this. And these guys were legit. They had fake buyers. They had people they paid to live in the houses, to manicure the lawns, to keep them, up to speed with the neighbors, right? They didn't let these houses go into decay. These are nice upper middle class homes in Aurora and other neighborhoods surrounding the city of Denver. And they would gut the basements and they would start growing weed in them. And they could get up to 1,000 plants per house. And they owned hundreds of houses turning out thousands of pounds per house every 3 months and moving these pounds at wholesale. These boys were moving hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product. And they were so efficient, in fact, they were so smart about what they did that, according to this article, to avoid detection by the electrical company, because obviously that uses a ton of power when you're growing weed like that. They would actually figure out a way to drill into the electrical system of the city and start siphoning off power from the city grid. So it was separately metered. So they couldn't tell. It basically fooled the utility companies. So these guys were killing it. And they were into coke, pills. They controlled and operated brothels, prostitution houses dotted throughout the suburbs. They had gambling parlors, high-end gambling houses. And these, again, all operated in nice neighborhoods, all under the noses of all of these legitimate middle-class people. And the money was laundered, as I said, through these Chinese restaurants that were very famous. They would pay workers to sign phony W-9s where they would actually pay them in drug money, but make it look like they were paying them out from legal proceeds from the business. This is all it's a well-oiled machine, and the DEA has no idea about this at the time, right? Then one day, according to this article, somebody walks into a local branch of the North County Police Department and gives them a tip. He says, you got to hear what's going on. There's these two brothers. They're making millions of dollars. They're running a gigantic indoor weed cartel, and they're doing it, essentially out in the open, and they've never been caught. Now, the Connect has an inside source that tells us that this man's name, he goes by an assumed name, Tom, right? Tom was another Asian guy who was basically embedded. He was a drug dealer. He was embedded with this cartel, and he was extorting them. He was basically demanding cash payments from these guys in order to not go to the authorities. So apparently they had failed. They missed a payment or whatever. So Tom gave this tip to the feds. So the feds start to set up on these guys, right? They get wiretaps. They track down their houses. They figure out what's going on. They assume, wow, we are about to hit a huge score. All right? And they set up for about a year on these guys. So this is about 2009, 2010, when they get ready. They're suited up. They're about a week away from hitting all of these spots at once. They got wiretaps. They got indictments. They've got warrants. They're really going in like this is a coordinated raid, okay? But then suddenly, before they're able to get into action, on one of the wiretaps, they have their Chinese translator. They hear one of these brothers say, "Shut it down, shut the operation down, shut it down." And they're like, what the fuck? Why would they be shutting it down now? Clearly, they knew that the feds were onto them. So all of a sudden, the guy who's leading the raid says, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go. So they run in. They start the operation the next day at dawn. They seized a bunch of shit. They seized thousands and thousands of plants, $2 million in cash. I think up to 50 houses where they were growing all the product, right? Arrested a bunch of people, but they still only had about a fraction of the product and the money that they thought they were going to get. So a week goes by. They figured out that these Chinese cartel members got a tip from a cop. One of the cops, because remember, they ran those Chinese restaurants, and that's where they got in. And it was known that the local division of the drug police, the narcotics cops out of North County in Denver, would eat at this Chinese restaurant. And this was, this owner, this Chinese guy, was paying to help politicians get elected. He knew the chief of police, knew a lot of these cops. So obviously what happened was one of them got wind that they were setting up on these guys, and they went to, their Chinese friend, the guy who had, paid them and been, helped fund their elections just like everybody does. And he said, hey, they're coming for you. So it was a corrupt cop that essentially helped these guys get away, because I don't think any of these guys did any prison time. I think they got a massive fine. I think they were charged with money laundering, and I don't know the exact details of it, but they basically got away with it. And I think the guy got his Chinese restaurants. I think he maybe got his restaurants seized too. I'm not really sure, but I know none of these guys did big time, and they were making millions. So flash forward 10 years, 2021. And by the way, that was the biggest bust in Colorado history. That was the biggest marijuana bust at that time, 2010, in Colorado history. Flash forward 11 years, 2021, they hit another gigantic dragnet, another huge operation raiding these marijuana houses. And again, you got to remember, by 2021, pot had already been legal in Colorado for what, Brian, almost 8 years? But they're still at it. They take this bust down, same format, right? Suburban houses used to grow thousands and thousands of high-grade indoor marijuana plants. It's the same guys. It's the exact same guys who had the operation back in 2010. The same Chinese guys, exact same business model, and it's even bigger. The 2021 raid was bigger than the 2020 raid, and that is now the biggest pot bust in Colorado history. So these Chinese brothers, man, they kept topping themselves. And it's no surprise. Hey guys, if you like that video, make sure to check out the full episode right here and subscribe to the channel right over here.